Learning how to play Dungeons & Dragons can be a challenging experience, especially if you're not learning from someone who already knows how to play. That's one of the reasons I'm really excited about the new D&D starter set, Heroes of the Borderlands, because it does make Dungeons & Dragons more approachable. For the average person just going to the store and wanting to buy D&D, this set gives us a big leap forward in terms of making the game more approachable. I myself learned how to play D&D in my mid-30s, and I remember it like it was yesterday. And I've also had the opportunity as a high school teacher to teach countless students how to play D&D and how to run their own games as a part of our school's RPG club, as well as for a 2-week course that I've taught. So I have some insight into what makes learning the game challenging, and I want to show what this set does to make it easier to jump in and play. Along the way, I'm also going to be reviewing each of the components in the box here, and there is a lot of stuff included. The box retails for $50 as opposed to the much cheaper price tags on some of the other starter sets that have come out over the last 10 or 11 years. So we're going to also try to evaluate, is it worth that higher price tag? All right, let's take a look. First of all, the box is heavy. It's large, it is quite sturdy, and it needs to be to hold all this stuff. Got a nice description and some art on the back. Some nice cover art, very classic looking cover art here. So here we go, we open the box, it is quite full. This quick start guide is really great. It gives a very no-nonsense description of everything in the box and how you should organize it, and then it gets into some of the basics of the game. You know, if you want to play the Dungeon Master, if you want to be a player, just some of the considerations and some of the basics of what you can find and how to use this stuff. Nice summary of some of the contents here. But we're going to go ahead and go through the contents in the order that they have here. First starting with the stuff that's for everyone, and then we will go into the for Dungeon Master only stuff. So first off, let's take a look at the play guide reference booklet here, which is the core rulebook for this set. I really appreciate that they have this little info about the original Keep on the Borderlands module, which is the inspiration for the adventure that comes in this set. They say this set reimagines the Keep on the Borderlands, so it's not a direct recreation. There's a little bit of info about how to use this guide, and then they give an overview of some of the components, some of the player pieces that players would want to pay attention to, and then they also do have some of the Dungeon Master items. So that's really great. And then we get into the rules. These are very similar to the basic rules that you can find online for free, and not too different from the rule books in some of the other starter sets, albeit these are the updated 2024 rules. I do appreciate that they seem to get better and better at making things more beginner friendly and just improving the explanations of some of the basic rules and how to play the game. Great little combat and damage example here that would be really helpful for new players. And then the last part of the book is just a rules glossary, which is also really handy. So if you ever come across a term you don't understand, chances are it's going to be found in the rules glossary here. So that's great. I also really like this black and white art that they have at the top of some of these pages here. I think it's really great. One last thing I'll say about this book, as well as all the other books in the set, is I appreciate that they have a stitched binding here. That's a big improvement over previous sets that just had stapled bindings, and those just fell apart much more easily. Then we get the class boards. Now, there are 4 classes in the box. There's Cleric, Fighter, Rogue, and Wizard, and for each class, there are 3 levels. So here we have level 1 Cleric, level 2 Cleric, and then once we get to level 3, you have 2 choices. You can do the Life domain or the Light domain, and so there's 2 different character sheets for once you get to level 3. The same thing is true of all the other classes. If I am a Cleric, I can choose my species. On one side of the species card, we get some nice art. On the other side, we get a description. So let's say we want to play a Dwarf Cleric. I can put my species card right here. And then for the backgrounds, on one side, we also get some nice art. And on the other side, we get a description. So let's say I want to choose a Farmer. So I'm a dwarf who used to be a farmer. And then I would also get some equipment cards. Now, in the box, we do have some magic item cards, and those are probably going to be mostly used by the DM and handed out based on the adventure. But the basic equipment cards are these green ones, and you can see that for a cleric, I should have a mace and a chain shirt. Now, I will note that although this is simplified in some ways, they still do use mastery properties for the weapons. However, for a cleric, they are not going to have any weapon mastery. If we did have any mastery properties, it would actually say that on the character board right here, and you can see that this says you can use the mastery property of any weapon you place here. For the cleric, that is not the case, so we wouldn't be able to use that mastery property. There is this little handy box down here, by the way, that says exactly what we need. Chain Shirt, Mace, and then the spell cards, Bless, Cure Wounds, Guiding Bolt, Light, Sacred Flame, Shield of Faith, Thaumaturgy, Toll the Dead, and then we would get 60 gold pieces of starting gold. So we could probably just put that in a little pile somewhere around our character sheet. And then for the spells, we would want to keep them handy, and you can just pull them out of the big spell deck here. You can see that there is a little emblem for each, a little bit of info on one side, and then on the other side we get the full description, just as you would find in the player's handbook. And then this is a spot where you would actually put any concentration spells, just to show that, hey, I'm concentrating on this spell. It does have some tips here for how to play this class. And then these little things are just called power tokens. So we would put one in Heroic Inspiration, and we would have one in each of our spell slots just to indicate how many spells we've used. Now my hit point maximum is 8, so I would also just put 8 little HP tokens out here in this area. Another handy inclusion for players that comes in the box are these little on your turn cards that show you what you can do in combat, and then on the back side there is just a list of all the actions that you could take. There's of course a full set of dice here. If you are new to D&D, I would recommend just getting a set of dice for each player. They are super cheap if you get them at a gaming shop or on Amazon. I'll put some links down in the description. So they're cheap enough, just get one for each player. Lastly, for players, there is a set of these storage bags, and this is really nice because at the end of a session, you can just put all this stuff into one storage bag to keep it together. All right, so that does wrap up the materials that are labeled for everyone here. And now we're gonna head to the Dungeon Master only section, starting with these 3 adventure booklets. We have the Wilderness, the Keep on the Borderlands, and the Caves of Chaos. So let's start with the Wilderness. The Wilderness is really intended to be the starting area that the player characters might start on the trail. Especially if you're a new Dungeon Master, that is what's recommended, because the intro area for the trail does have a lot of really detailed instructions for first-time Dungeon Masters. These guides right here kind of show you what, hey, here's how to use a random table. Here is how to do an ability check and things like that. So it explains the rules along with the elements of this adventure location. But really, this campaign is meant to be a sandbox, and these booklets are not meant to be separate adventures. Rather, this is one large adventure, and there are separate booklets for each location. The player characters might be going back and forth between all 3 of these quite often. If they start on the trail, they could choose to keep on exploring the wilderness and go to the woods, the fens, or the tamarack stand, or they could choose to go to the Caves of Chaos, or the Keep on the Borderlands here. If they go to the caves or the keep, then we use these booklets for those elements. The other wilderness areas do not give all this detailed explanation for new Dungeon Masters. They assume, okay, you kind of got it now, and we'll take off the training wheels. You can see there are 4 different woods encounters. It looks like 2 of them would require the map for the woods. And then for the fens, we have a similar sort of thing here with various encounters, 2 of which will require the map. Then we have the tamarack stand, same thing. And lastly, we have a whole lot of wilderness encounters. So just these encounters right here are kind of the main ones, but then there's also a whole lot more the player characters can run into if you're using these random encounters as well for these locations. Then let's head over to the Keep on the Borderlands. The Keep on the Borderlands has this very nice map. As you can see, it's sort of a castle, and there is a Castellan named Winvarl, who is a noble who runs this place. If the player characters come here for the first time, you'll want to use the Outer Gatehouse section, which once again has a very detailed guide for first-time Dungeon Masters. Then each of the locations, I think there are 14 throughout the keep, do have maybe things you can buy and things like that. Certainly NPCs that the Dungeon Master could roleplay. And then they also have little quests, things that the player characters can do, like finding goats or investigating a strange fire ghost in the provisioner's shop. So most of these encounters would have a little bit lower peril than you might find in the wilderness or the caves, but there's still some fun little encounters and things the player characters can do and interact with. And then in the last location, here is where we get an element that does tie together this as a campaign, sort of. It's very much still a sandbox. The player characters can choose what they want to do without any overarching linear narrative. But if they visit the fortress, they will have the opportunity to talk with Dwern the Scribe, who wants the player characters to investigate at least 3 wilderness areas to help him complete his map of the surrounding lands. Alondra the Advisor wants the player characters to help out the townsfolk and do many of the townsfolk quests, just to contribute to the overall well-being of the keep. And then lastly, Winvarl the Castellan wants the player characters to investigate the Caves of Chaos, the rumors of a cult of chaos that could be a threat, and he humbly asks that if need be, they quash the evil before it reaches the keep. So you have 3 different areas, 3 different quest givers for those areas, and if the player characters do complete what those NPCs want them to do, there is sort of an end in a grand feast for the heroes who have done so much for the people of the keep on the Borderlands. You could certainly continue play from there beyond the feast, but that is sort of putting a bow on the campaign here. And lastly, let's head over to the Caves of Chaos booklet. So here we have a map of the caves. It is recommended that if you're new, you start with Cave A, because once again, Cave A has a lot of very detailed guides for a new dungeon master, but the caves are all kind of separate mini dungeons, some of them bigger than others. You can see that this one's pretty small, this one's quite large, and not all of them are really combat heavy. Some of them might involve a lot of social interaction or give player characters the freedom to approach things in the way they want to. And each of these does include a what you need to play section, and that's true of the keep and the wilderness as well, and that's really handy, just reading this and making sure you have the necessary tokens, the monster cards, the magic item deck, the correct map, etc. So for the most part, these seem fairly disjointed, but the last one does have the actual cult here at the Shrine of Evil Chaos. So yeah, while it does feel a little bit disjointed, it is nice to have some variety where you get all sorts of different creatures here that you can see on this table. So that is a look at the 3 adventure booklets that form the campaign. This campaign does take player characters from level 1 to 3, so it's not a super high level campaign by any means. Now, one of the really cool things about this set is that it does come with handouts for this adventure and maps. Things like what you can buy at the various shops. We have a menu for the Drunken Dragon. We have a list of sacred services available, I'm assuming in the chapel or temple or whatever. And then we have a letter from Winvarl thanking the player characters for their services. All right, and then we have the maps. Now the maps are either full poster size or there are half size maps as well. So the Caves of Chaos make up a lot of the maps here because you're going to want to have one big old map for each of these quote-unquote dungeons. I think they look really nice. I appreciate the level of detail, and the colors are just really rich and vibrant. You've got one trails map, one woods map, one map for the fens, and one for the tamarack stand. And lastly, we have this really nice wilderness map, which is just an overview of the entire wilderness. On the other side, there is a map of the keep on the Borderlands. All in all, I think the maps are one of my favorite inclusions here. It's fine to play Theater of the Mind, but I know a lot of players with the original starter set were like going out and buying a separate battle mat or trying to figure out some way to represent these locations. And it's nice that they just include a really beautiful way that we can enjoy these locations and get a little more tactical with things, with minis and tokens and such. And speaking of minis and tokens, we do have all of these monster tokens. So these are a great inclusion. There's one for every single monster in this adventure, including the random encounters. And then there are also some other tokens, things like this treasure chest or this pile of bones here. And there are things like these barricades or a pit. There's the spider web and a log. I think the art on the tokens looks great for the most part. And one thing that I really appreciate about them too is that on one side you've just got the nice art, and on the other side you've got letters so that you can keep track of which one is which here in case you have a whole pack of kobolds or whatever it is. The box also has this really nice, sturdy, black plastic organizer for all the tokens, so that's a great inclusion as well. In addition, for the Dungeon Master, there are NPC cards for each of the NPCs in the adventure, and on one side you have some nice art, and then on the other side you get a nice description, information that will help the Dungeon Master roleplay these characters. So there are 20 total NPC cards. There are also 20 magic item cards. In addition to the 80 monster tokens, we also have monster cards. Now, not all of these are literal monsters like, a bandit or a commoner, for example. But these cards do need to be pretty large because on the backside, we do have all the information you would need to run these creatures in combat. So these are a really great inclusion and just make life way easier than, for example, going to the back of a book and trying to find the appropriate monster or trying to copy it down on an index card or something like that. And lastly, there is this nice little combat tracker here, which just is just a little worksheet that will help you keep track of combat in terms of initiative, order, and then how many hit points they have and things like that. I'm not sure how many pages there are here, but it's a lot, and that's pretty nice. So based on what you've seen so far, you can probably tell I'm a pretty big fan of this set. I think it is a really good step forward for a lot of reasons. I'm gonna mention two things I don't love. One is the price tag. $50 is a lot of money compared to the $20 set you used to be able to buy, and at times you could get that 2014 set for like $10 or $12 on Amazon. And at that price point, it was like, why not give D&D a shot? Just buy it and try it. That's a lot harder to justify at $50, and it might have some people thinking twice before investing. So that is unfortunate, but you are getting so much more stuff here, and I do think it's worth the price tag. You also have to keep in mind that that $10 or $12 set that you could get like 5 years ago was selling in a different time with different economic realities, a world with fewer tariffs and less inflation, things like that. So the price tag is one thing I don't love, and the other thing I'll say is I'm not loving the adventure so far. I've run parts of it for my own kids, and I'm just not really enjoying it. It feels kind of like just little mini pieces, lots and lots of little mini pieces that are kind of disjointed. And maybe here I'm showing a little bit of my bias towards Lost Mine of Phandelver, which came out in 2014, and I absolutely love it. Some people might like a more sandbox style campaign, more open-ended, where it's just here's this environment, here's this place to explore, do what you want. But personally, I kind of like the linear adventure that Lost Mine of Phandelver was. I feel like it just kind of had this forward momentum carrying you into something more epic. Then again, I get that there's the magic of just the freedom of choice and make this world what you want sort of thing. I get it, there's some tension there. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I really just haven't had that much fun running this adventure so far, and I don't know if my kids are really loving it either. But the good things, yes, this set is way more beginner friendly. For the first time DM, there are so many helpful guides in these adventures that are really holding your hand each step of the way, explaining the rules in very manageable chunks, and I just absolutely love that. I also think the first time DM is not gonna have any need to shop around trying to scrounge for a battle map and minis and all that stuff. Everything you could possibly want is in this box. You're not gonna really have any need to DIY anything here. And then lastly, from the Dungeon Master perspective, huge shout out to the monster cards in the box. I think these are gold. Let me explain how this used to go in some of the previous starter sets. You'd be running the adventure, and then it would refer to a monster. Then you'd have to flip away from that page in the adventure to one of the monster stat blocks in the back, and then probably there's another monster in that encounter, so you'd have to flip to a different page for that monster stat block. I was always like photocopying or taking screenshots and putting them on Google Docs, and for this you don't have to do any of that. You just pull out the corresponding monster cards and you're good to go. Little to no book flipping. Absolutely love it. And speaking of little to no book flipping, let's talk about some of the player aids as well. The spell cards. I love the spell cards. You just lay them out there. These are the spells I have available. There's descriptions on each one. It is absolutely beautiful. My daughter was playing a cleric and it just worked like a charm. No flipping through the book, no writing down extensive notes on what each spell does or trying to go online and find some kind of spell book generator, which are good tools. It's just way easier. And you also have the power tokens, which make it a lot easier, the hit point tokens, the gold tokens. All of this means you're not marking and erasing things on your character sheet. You're just moving tokens around. Oh, and then there's the card with the actions and the stuff you can do on your turn. All of this just makes life so much easier. Everything you need at your fingertips. I do want to comment on one other thing that's kind of interesting here, and that is character creation. One of the questions that we always have for new starter sets is, are they going to make pre-gens or give rules for character creation or both? And here, they do have character creation, but it's not a lot of rules that you're reading in the player's handbook. It's just kind of a modified character creation process that really simplifies things. You have your class board, and then you can add a species and a background. and those species and background cards are giving you certain bonuses. Now, those bonuses are different from what the species or background might give you if you're following the player's handbook rules. So that is a disadvantage. If you're trying to transfer your level 3 character from this set into the player's handbook rules to go to level 4 someday, you're going to run into some issues with that because the bonuses are just a little bit different because they had to simplify things here. But it is really nice that new players can have some choice. They can choose their species, they can choose their background and class, and they can do that in a way that is as simple as slotting in the cards. I think it's a great system that strikes a really good balance of simplicity and choice. Hey, I would love to hear what you think of this set as well. Leave your comments down below. And if you're interested, I do have some other videos. One is on D&D character creation with the new rules using the player's handbook if you want to get the real deal. And then I've also got an overview of the D&D 2024 player's handbook if you're interested in seeing what's in the big old book as opposed to this starter set, which is a little more beginner friendly. All right, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave it a like, make sure you're subscribed, and you'll see me again very soon. Take care.